The freezing New York wind howled through the alley behind the Waldorf Astoria, tearing straight through my designer coat as though the wool and cashmere were nothing more than tissue paper. It was the kind of cold that didn't just chill your skin. It seeped into your bones and made you question every life choice that had led you to be standing in a trash-strewn alley at 11:15 on a Thursday night in December. But standing in alleys at strange hours was part of the job description when you worked for Alexander Vance. I had been his chief executive assistant for 5 years. In that time, I had learned to anticipate his coffee order, black, no sugar, served at precisely 93 degrees, to manage his calendar like a general managing a battlefield, and to interpret the subtle gradations of his silence, because Alexander Vance spoke more through what he did not say than through what he did. I had watched him dismantle a 40-year-old conglomerate in a single afternoon. I had seen him reduce a room of Harvard-educated executives to stammering, sweating men with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a softly spoken question. I had managed his penthouse, his private jet, his charitable foundations, and occasionally his terrifying moods. In 5 years, I had never once seen him cry. He wasn't the type. Alexander Vance was the kind of man whom the financial press called the Ice King of Wall Street, not as a compliment, but as a warning. He was tall, dark-haired, and possessed of a face that seemed to have been carved specifically to express authority and nothing else. When he smiled in boardrooms, people described it afterward as unsettling. He didn't smile to be warm. He smiled to let you know he had already won. We had just emerged from a private dinner on the 32nd floor, one of those events where billionaires in black tie exchanged polite threats over duck confit and $1,000 Bordeaux. The car was waiting. The evening was, by all measures, over. Then the dumpster rattled. It was a small sound, almost swallowed by the wind, but Alexander stopped walking. His bodyguard, a solid wall of a man named Carter, reached for him instinctively. "Sir." Alexander raised one hand, and Carter froze. We all did. The dumpster rattled again. I watched Alexander's eyes cut toward it. Those dark, unreadable eyes that I had spent 5 years learning to decode. Something moved through them. Not irritation. Not curiosity, exactly. Something older and rawer than either. He walked toward it. I followed, because that was what I did. I followed Alexander Vance into boardrooms, into international negotiations, into the kind of meetings where security frisked you at the door. Following him toward a rattling dumpster in a New York alley felt, strangely, like the least dangerous thing I had done all year. He reached out and lifted the heavy metal lid. The smell hit us first, rotting food, cold metal, the sour edge of the city's underbelly. But what we saw made every other sensation disappear entirely. A child. She was curled in the far corner of the dumpster, wedged between a black garbage bag and a collapsed cardboard box. 7 years old. Maybe, though she was so thin that she looked younger. She was wearing a summer dress. A summer dress, in December, in New York City, with no coat, no shoes on her feet, only a single threadbare sock covering one foot and nothing on the other. The dress was printed with small yellow sunflowers and was torn at the collar and both shoulders, exposing pale skin mottled purple and blue with bruising and cold. Her hair was matted, tangled, and stuck to her face with what I realized, with a sick lurch, was dried blood from a cut above her eyebrow. Her lips were the color of a winter sky, a dusky, alarming blue. Her hands, God, her hands, they were the worst part. They were so small, and they were gripping the edge of the dumpster with a desperation that broke something open in my chest. Her tiny fingers were raw and cracked from the cold, the knuckles scraped and bleeding. When the lid went up and the light from Carter's flashlight found her, she didn't reach out. She didn't call for help. She shrank. She made herself as small as she could possibly make herself, pulling her knees to her chest, pressing herself into the corner of the dumpster with the practiced, reflexive terror of a creature that had learned, had been taught, that being found by adults meant being hurt. Her eyes, when they finally found Alexander's face, were enormous and dark and so full of a fear so complete that it wasn't even crying anymore. She had gone somewhere past crying. Carter stepped forward, and she flinched so violently that the sound she made, a tiny, bitten-off whimper, cut through the wind like a blade. "Don't." Alexander's voice was very quiet. He put his hand on Carter's arm. Carter stopped. Alexander crouched down. This alone was remarkable. I had never seen Alexander Vance crouch for anything. He lowered himself until he was at her eye level, balancing on his heels in the filthy snow, his $10,000 Brioni suit trousers soaking up the slush without a flicker of concern crossing his face. He looked at her for a long moment, and she looked back at him. "Hi," he said. Just that. His voice was stripped of the blade-sharp authority I was so accustomed to. It was almost unrecognizable, low and careful and very, very gentle. She didn't answer. "You don't have to be scared," he said. "No one here is going to hurt you." Her lips parted. She tried to speak and couldn't for a moment. Then, in a voice so small and fractured it barely existed, she said, "I'm sorry." A pause. "I didn't mean to be in the way." Another pause. "I won't take up space. I won't eat your food." Her breath came in shallow, shaking gulps. "I can sleep in the trash can, please. I won't bother anyone. Just," her voice dissolved into something that wasn't quite a sob, "just don't send me back to them. Please, please." The last word barely made it out of her. It was less a word than an exhalation, all the air going out of her at once, leaving her even smaller, even more folded in on herself. I pressed my hand over my mouth. I had expected Alexander to stand up, to call someone, to handle this the way he handled everything, efficiently, from a distance, delegating the emotional weight to whoever was paid to carry it. That was who he was. That was who he had always been. Instead, the Ice King of Wall Street reached up and, with hands that were visibly trembling, began to unbutton his cashmere overcoat. He pulled it off his shoulders. He leaned forward and wrapped it around the child with a care so painstaking, so deliberate, as though he was terrified that any sudden movement would shatter her. He tucked it around her shoulders. He kept his movements slow. He never looked away from her face. "You will never sleep in a trash can again," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. A small fracture, almost imperceptible, but I heard it. In 5 years, I had never heard his voice crack. "I promise you." She stared at him with those enormous, disbelieving eyes. And then, slowly, so slowly, like a bird deciding whether to trust the hand extended toward it, she reached out and gripped the lapel of his coat with both of her cracked, bleeding hands. "Okay," she breathed. Alexander looked up at me, and in his eyes, behind the mask, behind the ice, behind the 5 years of wall I had watched him maintain, I saw something I could only describe as recognition. He had seen something in this child's face that he recognized from somewhere very deep inside himself. "Evelyn," he said quietly. "She's coming with us." The drive uptown was silent. "Lily." We learned her name when Alexander asked it softly, and she answered in a voice like something half-remembered, sat wrapped in his overcoat in the back of the Maybach, pressed against the door as though she was still calculating the distance to the exit. She was shivering so badly the coat was trembling around her. I reached over and put my arm around her, and she went completely rigid, and I kept my arm there anyway, kept it there and kept still and kept breathing, until, somewhere around 57th Street, I felt the smallest incremental softening in her spine. Just a fraction. Just enough. Alexander sat across from us, watching her with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something that was partly devastation and partly something that looked terrifyingly close to hope. He called his personal physician from the car. Dr. Helena Park had been Alexander's doctor for 6 years and was entirely accustomed to extraordinary requests at extraordinary hours. I could hear the professional neutrality in her voice as she agreed to meet us at the penthouse. Whatever she thought, she kept it to herself. That was why Alexander kept her on retainer. The penthouse at 157 was everything you would expect from the home of a man who had clawed his way from nothing to everything and had furnished his life accordingly. A cathedral of glass and clean lines and carefully curated silence, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that glittered 47 floors below like a scattered galaxy. It was beautiful in the way that museums are beautiful, impressive, impersonal, and deeply unsuited to children. Lily stepped inside and stopped. She stood in the entryway with her bare foot on the heated marble floor and her one-socked foot beside it, wearing a dead man's overcoat and a summer dress in December, and she looked around at the soaring ceilings and the abstract art and the panoramic sweep of Manhattan beyond the windows with an expression of absolute, uncomprehending wonder. Then she took a careful step backward, off the marble, onto the threshold. "I'll wait here," she said. Her voice was a threat. I don't want to get anything dirty. I looked at Alexander. He was looking at her feet, one bare, one socked, both filthy from the alley floor, and at his marble entryway, which he would not have let most adults walk across without a second thought. "Come in, Lily," he said. His voice was very measured, very controlled, as though he was holding something at bay by sheer force of will. "Please." She looked at him for a long moment, evaluating. Then she looked at me. I smiled at her, the most ordinary, uncomplicated smile I could manage, the kind that said everything is okay and nothing here will hurt you. And I held out my hand. She took it. Her fingers were ice cold and impossibly small. I took her to the guest bathroom and ran a warm bath, talking to her the whole time about nothing in particular. What kind of shampoo she liked, whether she preferred bubbles, she did. I found some under the sink, whether she was hungry. She answered in monosyllables, but she answered, which I took as a good sign. While she was in the bath, I went to find something for her to wear and returned to find one of the bathroom towels, a thick Egyptian cotton one worth more than my first paycheck, folded very neatly on the edge of the tub. She had folded it. This child, half frozen and battered, had still stopped to fold the towel because she was afraid of making a mess. Something in my throat went tight and stayed that way. I found a cashmere sweater of Alexander's that hit her at the knees, which would have to do. When she came out, clean and wrapped in it, her hair combed back from her face, she looked like something out of a fairy tale. A small, solemn thing with enormous dark eyes and a bruise across her cheekbone, and a grace about her that had nothing to do with her circumstances and everything to do with whatever unbreakable thing was at her core. I brought her to the kitchen and made toast with butter and a mug of warm milk with honey. I set it in front of her and went to fill a glass of water. When I turned back, she had eaten one corner of the toast and tucked the rest of it into the pocket of Alexander's sweater. I set the glass of water down carefully. I sat across from her. I did not draw attention to it. She watched me with those careful eyes, waiting for the consequence. "You can have more," I said. "As much as you want. There's more in the kitchen, lots more. You can eat all of it." She looked at the toast in her pocket, then at me. "In case," she said quietly, "in case there isn't any later." I had to look at the window for a moment. At the city below, at the lights. "There will always be more later," I said, when I trusted my voice again. "I promise." She absorbed this without expression. She ate the rest of the toast, slowly, with the focused deliberation of a child who had learned not to eat too quickly because eating too quickly could be punished, and drank the milk, and when I offered a second slice, she looked at me for a long moment before accepting it. I heard Alexander in the hallway, pacing. He had changed out of his ruined suit and was in a dark shirt and trousers, his sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly disheveled, the most undone I had ever seen him outside of a crisis. He was on the phone, his voice low and clipped, and I caught the words "call me back" with everything and no. Tonight before Dr. Park arrived, and I needed to prepare Lily. The examination took 40 minutes. I stayed in the room. Lily had looked at me when Dr. Park arrived, and I had understood the look and stayed without being asked. I held her hand throughout, and she gripped it with both of hers and stared at the ceiling, and every time Dr. Park had to ask her to move or lift a part of her clothing to examine her, I watched Lily's face go very still and very controlled in the way that children learn to go still when stillness is the thing that makes adults stop hurting them. When it was over, Dr. Park came to find Alexander in his study. I sat with Lily, who had fallen into an abrupt, profound sleep, the kind of sleep that follows genuine physical exhaustion, dropping off mid-sentence with one hand still loosely around mine. I watched her sleep, and I listened to the murmur of voices from the study, and I felt the cold, hard certainty of something settling inside me. I had worked for Alexander Vance for 5 years. I had helped him build companies and dismantle them. I had managed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I had done a great many things in his service. Whatever came next, whatever it took, I was going to make sure that the people who had done this to this child understood what it meant to have made an enemy of Vance Consolidated. Dr. Park's report was 14 items long. I know because Alexander read it to me the next morning, standing at the window with the Manhattan skyline behind him and the report in his hands, his voice absolutely flat, as though the flatness was the only thing between him and something catastrophic. 2 healed fractures in her left forearm, old breaks, improperly set, which meant they had never been treated. Cigarette burns, a dozen of them, varying in age. On the backs of her upper arms and shoulder blades where clothing would cover them. A deep contusion across her ribs. The cut above her eyebrow. Extensive scarring on her palms and fingers consistent with having been forced to kneel on rough surfaces for extended periods. Malnutrition. She was in the 5th percentile for weight for a 7-year-old. Early-stage frostbite on 3 toes of her right foot, the one that had been bare. He read all 14 items. Then he set the report down on his desk with perfect, careful precision, and he stood with his back to me for a very long time. "Alexander," I said, "I need a minute." His voice was still flat, still controlled. "I know." I waited. I was good at waiting. 5 years had made me good at reading the spaces between his words and knowing what they required. After perhaps 2 minutes, he turned around. His face was composed. His eyes were not. "I want everything," he said. "The Fosters' names, addresses, employer information, financial records, length of time they've been in the system, how many other children have been placed with them. I want the name of every caseworker who signed off on her placement and every supervisory official who was supposed to monitor it. I want the name of the facility she came from before the placement, who runs it, where their funding comes from, and whether there are any state contracts involved." "I already started," I said, "last night, after she fell asleep. I have the preliminary file." He looked at me. Something in his expression shifted, not quite gratitude, which was not something Alexander had ever been comfortable expressing, but something adjacent to it. "Of course you did," he said. I opened my laptop. Her full name is Lily Reyes. Age 7. She was placed with Marcus and Rita Foster 8 months ago by the Sunridge Children's Services Center in the Bronx. This is her 3rd placement in 2 years. The 2 previous placements were ended by the Fosters. Both reported behavioral difficulties. Looking at her file notes, the behavioral difficulties appear to have consisted of things like being too quiet and once not finishing her dinner. Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The Fosters have had 11 foster placements over the past 6 years," I continued. "They're currently receiving state subsidies for 3 children, though Lily is the only one actually living in the household. I'm still tracking the other 2. Marcus Foster has a prior conviction for fraud that somehow didn't prevent the placement approval. Rita Foster has no prior record, but 2 of their former placements have adult social media profiles now, and both have posts that." I paused. "They're not subtle. Who approved the placement?" "Caseworker Elena Marsh. Supervisor David Kowalski. Kowalski's brother-in-law sits on the board of Sunridge Children's Services." I looked up from my screen. "The organization received $240,000 in state contracts last year." The silence that followed was the particular quality of silence that I associated with Alexander at his most dangerous. Not the silence of a man who had nothing to say, but the silence of a man who was deciding exactly how much of what he was feeling to allow into the world. "Pull everything," he said. "Every contract, every financial disclosure, every audit. I want it cross-referenced and documented by tonight. Already in progress. I have Thomas and the research team on it." He nodded. He looked toward the hallway, in the direction of the guest room where Lily was still sleeping. Then he looked back at me. "She was in the trash," he said. "She was in the trash because she thought it was safer than the house." "Yes. She offered to stay in the trash. She apologized for existing." "I know." He looked away. His hand, resting on the desk, curled into a fist for a moment and then deliberately, slowly, uncurled. "When I was 9, he said, there was a restaurant on 11th Avenue. Italian place. They left their bins out back on Tuesday and Friday nights. The cook he was decent. He would wrap the day-old bread separately and leave it on top." He paused. "I knew which dumpsters in a 12-block radius had the best food. I knew which ones had rats and which ones didn't. I knew how long it took for the police to clear you out of a particular doorway if you were sleeping there." Another pause. "I was 12 before I slept in a bed 2 nights in a row." I had known pieces of Alexander's history. He had made no particular secret of his origins, partly because they were documented and partly because he had turned them into armor. "I started with nothing." He said it in interviews. He said it to investors. He wore his poverty as a credential, as proof of will. But he had never, in 5 years, described it like this. Not in this voice. Not to me. "She reminded you of yourself?" I said carefully. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't have anyone," he said. "When I was 9. When I was 12. When I was—" He stopped. "She has someone now." She does, I agreed. He looked at me, and in his eyes there was something raw and unwieldy that I recognized, after a moment, as hope trying to exist in a person who had stopped believing in it a very long time ago. It was that afternoon that Lily showed us her most practiced survival behavior, and it broke us both in the same moment. I had made lunch, sandwiches, fruit, a glass of apple juice. I set everything out at the kitchen island, where Lily had climbed up onto a stool and was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, watching me with those careful eyes. Alexander was working at the kitchen table. He had moved his laptop there, I noticed, rather than retreating to his study. I didn't comment on it. Lily ate her sandwich with extraordinary care, consuming exactly half, and then wrapping the second half in her napkin with small, precise movements. "She's doing it again," Alexander said quietly, from the table. He wasn't looking at his laptop. "I see it," I said. Lily heard us and froze. Her eyes went wide, the panicked calculation of a child expecting to be punished for a transgression she couldn't yet identify. "Lily," I said gently, sitting down beside her. "You can eat all of it. You can have 2 more sandwiches if you want. You can have the entire kitchen." "I was saving it," she said in a small, careful voice, "for later." "In case there isn't, there will be," I said. "Always." She looked at me with the particular expression of a child who had been told things before and learned not to believe them. "Mrs. Rita said the same thing," she said. "At first, the kitchen was very quiet." "Lily," Alexander's voice came from behind me. I turned. He had left his laptop and crossed the room and was crouching down to her level again, in that remarkable way he had. The most powerful man I knew, folding himself down to look a 7-year-old in the face. "I need you to understand something. Are you listening?" She nodded, very seriously. "I have $17 billion, he said. He said it simply, without performance, as though he was conveying a useful fact. "Do you know how much food that can buy?" She thought about this. "A lot. An incomprehensible amount. You could eat every sandwich in this building every day for the rest of your life, and I would still have." He paused, seeming to calculate. "An incomprehensible amount." The ghost, the absolute ghost, of a smile crossed her face. It was there and gone in an instant, like a flicker of sunlight on water, but it had been there. "That's a lot of sandwiches," she said. "It is," he agreed gravely. "So please eat yours." She looked down at the wrapped half sandwich in her napkin. She looked at him. She looked at me. And then, carefully, she unwrapped it and took a bite. I found I had to look at the window again. She slept with the light on. She needed the light on. Darkness brought sounds that woke her in an instant, left her pressed into the corner of the guest room bed with her knees at her chest and her eyes wide, listening for footsteps. The first time it happened, I was the one who heard it, who went to her door and knocked gently, and said her name and heard silence. I opened the door. She was wedged between the headboard and the wall, making herself the smallest possible shape in the corner of the bed, and when she saw me in the doorway she said, very quickly and very quietly, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll be quiet. I'll be quiet now." "You didn't wake anyone," I said. I came and sat on the edge of the bed, at a careful distance. "You're okay." I heard. She stopped. I thought I heard the door. "Just me. Just Evelyn." She stared at me. Then, slowly, she unfolded herself. She did not lie back down. She sat with her knees pulled up, looking at the lit lamp on the nightstand with the expression of someone inventorying what was safe. "What happened if you made noise?" I asked. I kept my voice very gentle. "At the Fosters?" A long silence. Then, "It depended on who heard it," she said. "Mr. Marcus didn't care as much. Mrs. Rita," she stopped again. "Mrs. Rita had a wooden spoon." I sat with that for a moment. "Did she use it often?" Lily's eyes stayed on the lamp. "When she was having a bad day," she said carefully. "Which was most days." A pause. "I learned to be quiet." "You learned," I said. "It wasn't your fault. The quiet. That wasn't something you should have had to learn." She looked at me then, and in her eyes was the baffled, tentative expression of a child processing a concept too large to fully hold. The idea that silence was not her natural obligation, that the accommodation she had made for someone else's cruelty was not simply the correct shape of the world. "Go back to sleep," I said. "I'll stay until you do." She lay down. I sat. After a long while, her breathing slowed. Before she went fully under, she said, in a voice that was already half-dream, "Evelyn." "Yes." You smell nice. I laughed a little, very quietly. Thank you, Lily. Mrs. Rita smelled like cigarettes and something sharp. A pause. Vodka. I know what it is now. I looked it up at school. You're very smart, I said softly. Mr. Marcus said I was too smart. Said it made me. The voice grew slower. Made me uppity. A long breath. I don't know what uppity means. It means nothing, I said. Sleep. She slept. I sat in the chair by the window for another hour, looking at the city that went on and on below, blazing with light and indifferent to everything. And I thought about a 7-year-old girl who had learned what vodka smelled like, and how to fold towels, and how to make herself very small and very quiet, and who had offered to sleep in a dumpster because she thought that was a reasonable trade for not being hurt. And then I went to find Alexander, because I knew he would be awake. He was in his study, standing at the window with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched, looking at the same city I had been looking at. He heard me come in and didn't turn. She okay? He asked. Asleep. She had a nightmare. A pause. She'll have more. Probably. Yes. Another silence. He turned the glass in his hand, light catching the amber liquid. When I was 7, he said, I had a caseworker named Mrs. Donnelly. She visited twice. The second time she came, she saw the mark on my face and wrote in her report that I had fallen on the playground. She was transferred to another district 3 months later. He paused. I never saw anyone from the system again after that. How long were you in the foster system? Until I was 11. Then I was on the street. He stopped. It was better, he said simply. I thought about that. About what it meant for a child to find the street preferable to the home he had been assigned. She asked me about the wooden spoon. I said. He turned then and looked at me, and the expression on his face was something I had no professional vocabulary for because I had never seen it on him before. A naked, unguarded grief that he hadn't yet had the chance to armor. Fix it, Evelyn, he said. His voice was very quiet. Whatever it takes. Fix it. We'll fix it together, I said. By the 3rd day, I had a file 2 inches thick. I spread it across the conference table in Alexander's home office. Thomas Chin from our research division had worked through both nights, and 2 of our legal team's investigators had been on it since morning. What we had assembled was the kind of thing that made your stomach turn over slowly, the way bad news does when it confirms what you already feared. Marcus and Rita Foster had been in the foster system for 6 years. In that time, 11 children had passed through their home, none of them for longer than 14 months. The subsidies they received averaged $600 per child per month, a number that sounds modest until you multiply it by 11 children over 6 years and account for the fact that their documented household expenditures on the children were minimal to non-existent. 2 former placements were now adults. A 20-year-old named Jason who had been hospitalized for malnourishment at age 9 and subsequently removed, and a 19-year-old named Amara, whose public social media posts spoke of her time with the Fosters in language so specific and so devastating that our legal team had already flagged them as potential testimony. Supervisor David Kowalski had approved 8 of the 11 placements. His brother-in-law, Richard Sunridge, was not merely on the board of Sunridge Children's Services, he was its founder, and the organization's state contracts had doubled in the 3 years since Kowalski's promotion to department supervisor. The audit trail was not subtle. It was the work of people who had never expected anyone to look. Elena Marsh, Lily's assigned caseworker, had conducted 1 in-person home visit in 8 months. Her report from that visit described a clean and loving home environment. Her notes mentioned that she had spoken to Lily alone for 5 minutes. The report had been filed from a coffee shop 2 miles from the foster address, according to the metadata on the document. She had never been inside the building. This is fraud, I said when Alexander finished reading. Multiple counts. Child endangerment, welfare fraud, falsification of government records, abuse of official position. I know what it is, he said. And it's not just the Fosters and Kowalski. There are 3 other children currently in Sunridge-managed placements with documented complaint histories that were never followed up. I've flagged their addresses for the legal team. Alexander set the file down. He was wearing his boardroom expression, the one that meant the calculation was complete and the decision made, and the only remaining question was execution. I had seen it before hundreds of times in meeting rooms and never found it comforting. Right now, directed at this problem, I found it the most reassuring thing I had ever seen. Give me Richard Whitmore, he said. Richard Whitmore was the most formidable child welfare attorney in the state of New York, a former federal prosecutor who now specialized in systemic abuse cases with an approach to litigation that was widely described by defendants' lawyers as scorched earth. And give me Judge Patricia Reed's clerk. She handles emergency protective custody matters in family court, and she's straight. I was already writing. And the AG's office. He thought for a moment. Not yet. We move for emergency protective custody of Lily first. Then we go to the AG. I want her legally safe before this becomes public. Smart, I said. If the Fosters find out what we're building before the protective custody order goes through, they'll run. Or they'll try to move the other children. He nodded. Whitmore first. Tonight, if possible. I called Richard Whitmore from the hallway while Alexander went back to Lily, who was in the living room with a stack of picture books I had found and a cup of hot chocolate, examining them with the careful attention of a child who had not had many books and was treating each page with a reverence that made me ache. Whitmore agreed to come at 8. At 7:55, the lobby called to let us know we had visitors. It was not Whitmore. Marcus and Rita Foster were not what I had expected. I had constructed them in my mind from Lily's trembling accounts and the clinical language of the reports. Monsters, necessarily, in a child's testimony. What walked into the Vance penthouse lobby at 7:55 p.m. on a Friday evening were two people in their mid-40s, Marcus in a fleece jacket and Rita in a quilted vest, looking for all the world like someone's ordinary neighbors. She was carrying a large tote bag. He had his hands in his pockets. They looked aggrieved rather than guilty, the expression of people who believe themselves entirely in the right. "We're here for our daughter," Rita announced to the lobby security desk, loudly enough that 3 other people in the lobby turned to look. "She was taken without our consent. We know she's here. We've called our lawyer." I took the call from security downstairs and told them to send the visitors up to the 47th floor meeting room. I told the receptionist to set out water. I called Carter. Then I straightened my jacket, picked up my 2-inch file, and walked down the hall. Alexander was already in the meeting room when the Fosters arrived. He was standing at the head of the table with his hands in his pockets, and he was wearing his boardroom face, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop 3 degrees when Marcus Foster walked in and registered who he was looking at. Rita recovered faster. "Mr. Vance," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I don't know what story Lily told you, but she's a troubled child. We've sacrificed a great deal for her, and we'd appreciate—" "Sit down," Alexander said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. They sat. "Lily Reyes was removed from your home because she was in a dumpster in a Manhattan alley wearing a summer dress in December," Alexander said. "Before we go any further, I want to make sure you understand that. She was in a garbage can. She told me she preferred it." Rita's smile thinned. "Children sometimes act out." "Mrs. Foster." I opened a file. I slid the first document across the table, the medical report, all 14 items. "This is the documentation from the physician who examined Lily 3 days ago. I'd like to draw your attention to items 3 through 8, which document injuries consistent with repeated physical abuse." I slid the second document across. "This is the financial audit of your foster subsidy receipts over the past 6 years, cross-referenced with documented expenditures on the children in your care. I'd like to draw your attention to the $47,000 discrepancy." A third document. "This is a statement from Jason. I gave the last name. He's 20 now. He's happy to discuss his time in your care." A fourth. "This is Amara. Same." A fifth. "This is the evidence that caseworker Marsh never entered your home during her one scheduled visit, and that Supervisor Kowalski's approval of your placements constitutes a conflict of interest given his familial relationship with the founder of Sunridge Children's Services." I set the rest of the file flat on the table. "There is more," I said. "A great deal more. We have been thorough." The color had left Rita Foster's face. Marcus had stopped looking aggrieved. He was looking at the documents with the expression of a man watching a building fall. "You can't keep her," Rita said. Her voice had changed. It was thinner now, sharper, the voice behind the smile. "She's a ward of the state. You have no legal authority." "Richard Whitmore is in the elevator," I said, checking my phone. "He's our attorney. He specializes in emergency protective custody orders. Given the evidence in this file, we expect to have a court order by Monday morning. In the meantime, Lily is safe, she is fed, and she is warm, and she is not going anywhere with you." "This is theft," Marcus said. You can't just—" "Carter," Alexander said. His head of security appeared in the doorway. "Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Foster to the lobby," Alexander said, "and ensure that the doorman has their photographs. They are not to enter this building again. You'll hear from our lawyer." Rita snapped, half rising from the chair as Carter moved. "Your lawyer will hear from ours," I said. "Mr. Whitmore's contact information is on the last page of the file, which you're welcome to take with you. Have a pleasant evening." They were gone 4 minutes later. Carter reported they had been. His word was escorted, but his expression suggested something more emphatic. Whitmore arrived 60 seconds after they left, took one look at the file, and said he could have a petition for emergency protective custody before a judge by 9 the next morning. I want to tell Lily. She was still in the living room, still with her books, and she looked up when I came in. Her eyes went immediately to my face, reading it, assessing it, the way she had learned to read every adult face that crossed her threshold. "Were those?" she said. "Were they here?" "They're gone," I said. "They can't take you." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked down at her book. Then, very quietly, she said, "Okay, just that. Okay," as though she had decided, cautiously and provisionally, to believe it. It happened on a Tuesday. We had been operating in a kind of organized urgency for the better part of a week. Legal filings, investigative follow-ups, Whitmore's team running interference, our own research division peeling back layer after layer of Sunridge's operations. The emergency protective custody order had come through on schedule. Lily was legally in Alexander's care, pinning the full hearing. But in between the calls and the documents and the strategy meetings, there was also breakfast and dinner, and Lily, cautiously, incrementally, learning the terrain of the penthouse the way a small animal learns which parts of a new territory are safe. She had found the window seat in the east-facing guest room and adopted it as her post, sitting there with her books or just looking at the city with a philosophical patience that was both heartbreaking and quietly magnificent. She had stopped pocketing food. It happened gradually. One day she left half a cookie on the plate without putting the other half away, and we didn't comment. And the next day, she ate a whole apple in one sitting, and still nobody commented. And by the end of the week, she was eating with the uncomplicated concentration of a child who believed that meals would continue to arrive. She liked Alexander's cook. The cook's name was Pierre, and he was French and enormously enthusiastic about feeding people. And he had taken one look at Lily and decided that his mission in life was to fatten her up on crepes and warm soup and little cinnamon rolls that came out of the oven every morning. Lily had decided that Pierre was, possibly, the best person she had ever encountered in her life. Alexander, meanwhile, was being actively undone by a 7-year-old. He didn't know it. Or perhaps he did and had no framework for it. This man who had survived everything by the expedient of needing nothing and no one. But I watched it happening over the course of those days. The way he started working from the kitchen table instead of his study. The way he learned the exact temperature she liked her hot chocolate. The way he had gone out at midnight on the second day and come back with 17 children's books because she had mentioned, in passing, that she liked the one about the boy in the train. On the Tuesday, she climbed up next to him on the kitchen banquette while he was working and sat there in silence for a long time, looking at his laptop screen with grave interest. "What are you doing?" she asked finally. "Reading a contract," he said. "What's a contract?" "An agreement between people. It says what each person will do and what they'll get." She thought about this. "Did I have a contract with Mr. Marcus and Mrs. Rita?" He put down his laptop. "In a way, the government made an agreement with them to take care of you. They didn't do a very good job," she said. "No," he agreed. "They didn't." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to make sure they get in trouble?" "Yes." "Real trouble." "Real trouble," he confirmed. She nodded. She absorbed this. Then she leaned over and, with the complete unself-consciousness of a child who has decided to trust someone, put her head against his arm. Alexander went very still. She looked up at him from that position, with those dark, serious eyes. "You're not very soft," she observed. He made a sound that was almost, not quite, but almost a laugh. "No, that's okay," she said, and put her head back down. "You're warm." I was in the kitchen doorway. I had just come in from the hallway. Alexander's eyes found mine over the top of Lily's head, and I watched him. This man who had built an empire by turning every vulnerability to steel. look at this child against his arm with an expression that was completely unguarded for perhaps the first time in 30 years. He looked terrified. He looked devastated. He looked like a man standing on the edge of something enormous and understanding that whether he jumped or not, the ground had already shifted beneath him and there was no going back. Then Lily said, in a small, drowsy, experimental voice, the way children test words that feel important, "Daddy." Alexander didn't move. He didn't breathe. "Is it?" She lifted her head slightly. "Is it okay if I call you that?" "I don't have to. Her brow furrowed. "I don't know what else to call you. I could call you Mr. Vance, but you said I didn't have to be that formal, and—" "You can call me that," he said. His voice was very rough. "Okay." She put her head back down. "And Evelyn is mommy," she said, with the breezy authority of a child settling a question she had apparently already decided. "I already asked her. I had, in fact, been asked this the night before, in the quiet of Lily's room, in a voice so careful and tentative that I had felt it like a hand around my heart. I had said yes immediately, and Lily had nodded with great seriousness as though completing a formal application process, and I had spent the next 10 minutes in the hallway bathroom composing myself. Alexander looked at me again. I shrugged, smiling. He looked back down at the top of Lily's head. "Okay," he said. "Just that." His voice was barely working. And then he put his arm around her, carefully, as though handling something extraordinarily fragile. And she tucked herself against him with the easy confidence of a child who has, for reasons she cannot fully explain, decided that this is a safe place. He looked at me. His eyes were bright. I mouthed, "See?" He looked away, but I saw the corner of his mouth. Richard Whitmore called at 8:15 on a Wednesday morning. "We're ready," he said. By 9 o'clock, the machine was running. The Attorney General's office had been our last conversation before pulling the trigger. I had spent 2 days cultivating a contact there, a deputy AG named Sandra Okonkwo, who had her own history with Sunridge Children's Services and had, when I presented our file, gone very quiet in the manner of someone who has waited a long time for exactly this information. She had 3 of her own investigators on it within the hour. What followed over the next 72 hours was, from the perspective of everyone we had called enemy, a kind of annihilation. It began with Marcus and Rita Foster. At 10 a.m. on Wednesday, they were served with a civil lawsuit by Whitmore's firm encompassing 7 counts of child abuse, 6 counts of welfare fraud, and 2 counts of falsification of official documents, with damages sought in amounts that would have required them to sell everything they owned twice over. At the same time, criminal complaints filed through the AG's office triggered a warrant. They were arrested at their home in the Bronx at 11:45 a.m. Marcus at the kitchen table, Rita in the hallway, and the photographs ran on the 6 o'clock news. I watched the coverage with Alexander, who was very still, and Lily, who was next to him on the couch and who watched the screen with the expression of someone seeing a thing she has been afraid of for a very long time become, suddenly, very small. "They look scared," she observed. "They are," Alexander said. She thought about this. "Good," she said. "Not with satisfaction." "Exactly. Not with the energy of someone enjoying someone else's pain. Just with a quiet, settled finality, like a door being closed." David Kowalski was placed on administrative suspension by the Department of Social Services pending investigation of conflict of interest complaints, which we had submitted simultaneously through 3 separate channels to ensure that no single point of failure could kill it. The federal contractor inquiry into Sunridge Children's Services froze all state payments within 48 hours of the AG's review. Richard Sunridge, who had apparently not been aware that his brother-in-law's approvals were quite so well documented, hired 3 lawyers and promptly said nothing, which was, according to Whitmore, both wise and deeply insufficient. Alexander called in 3 separate business favors he had been sitting on for years. One of them resulted in the building that housed Sunridge's offices being sold at a substantially below-market price to a holding company that Evelyn had spent 2 days incorporating. The holding company's first act as landlord was to decline to renew the lease. The second was to announce a renovation. Caseworker Elena Marsh, whose falsified reports were now the subject of both a criminal inquiry and a civil action, resigned on Thursday morning. The resignation letter was, Whitmore sent it to me with a dry comment, 2 sentences long, and contained no admission of wrongdoing, which surprised nobody. The other two children in active Sunridge-managed placements with documented complaint histories were removed by emergency order on Thursday afternoon. One of them was 4 years old. I was in the office with Alexander when Whitmore called with that last piece of news. Alexander listened. He said, "Good." He hung up. He sat for a moment. "The 4-year-old," he said. "I know," I said. "Is she?" "Dr. Park is consulting. She's in good hands." He nodded. He looked at the window. How many years were those people in the system? 6 years. 11 children. And nobody looked. Nobody looked, I agreed. Until now. He was quiet for a moment. "I want to endow a monitoring organization," he said. "Independent. Not state-affiliated. Something with actual investigative capacity. Something with teeth." He looked at me. "Will you run it?" I blinked. "I run it." "You found this in 48 hours," he said. "You had the file before I asked for it. You managed the legal team, the investigators, the AG contact, the civil filings, and the press strategy simultaneously, while also keeping Lily calm and making sure I didn't do anything irreversible when I was angry." A pause. "You built this. You should run it." I looked at him for a long moment. "I'm your executive assistant. You're the most capable person I've ever worked with," he said. "I'll need a new title for you. We'll sort that out." He said it with the brisk finality of someone checking off a task, as though it was settled, as though it had always been settled. "Alexander. The Vance Foundation has a child welfare division that's been functionally dormant for 3 years, he said. "I'll fund it properly. $50 million to start. You'll have staff, legal resources, investigative capacity. No state contracts. No government interference." He paused. "We know what happens when the government is the only one watching." I thought about Lily in the dumpster, about Elena Marsh and her visit that she filed from a coffee shop 2 miles away, about 11 children over 6 years and nobody looking. "Okay," I said. "Yes." He nodded once. That was enough. At the sentencing hearing, which came faster than either of us expected, because the evidence was as clean and complete as anything the prosecutor had seen in 20 years, and because the AG had decided to make an example, Marcus Foster received 4 years on the criminal abuse charges, with additional concurrent sentences on the fraud counts. Rita Foster received 5 years, 6 months, the additional time reflecting what the judge described, in her sentencing remarks, as a calculated, sustained, and deliberate pattern of cruelty to children in her legal care. I had not planned to be in the courtroom, but I was. They were brought in separately, and I watched Rita Foster's face as the judge read the sentence. Watched the disbelief move through it, and then something harder and uglier. And then, when the handcuffs went back on, the particular collapsing quality of a person whose story about themselves has been permanently revised. She looked toward the gallery as she was let out. I don't know what she was looking for. She found my face instead, and I held her gaze until she was through the door, because I could, because I was here and Lily was safe, and there was nothing she could do to either of us ever again. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the February air was cold but less savage than December, and there was the faint suggestion of something other than winter at the far edge of the sky. Alexander was waiting for me at the bottom of the steps. He had been there throughout, but had stayed in the back of the gallery, and I had felt his presence without needing to look. "Done?" he asked. "Done," I said. Kowalski had taken a plea arrangement the previous week. 2 years, disgorgement of all income earned during the period of the fraud, permanent bar from public employment. Richard Sunridge was fighting his charges, but Whitmore was quietly confident. The organization was dissolved, the contracts terminated, the building gutted for renovation. We stood on the courthouse steps in the February cold, and he looked at the sky, and I looked at him, and I thought about how much had happened in 2 months, how one dark alley and one shivering child, and one impossible moment of a man dropping to his knees in the snow had undone everything we both thought we knew about what our lives were. "She asked me what a family is," he said. "Last night. She asked how you know when something is a family. What did you say?" He was quiet for a moment. I said I wasn't sure I knew. She said she thought it was when someone worries about you, but doesn't hit you. He paused. I said that seemed like a reasonable starting definition. I laughed a little, softly. "She's very wise." "She's extraordinary," he said. It wasn't the word he normally used for things. He said it very simply, without qualifying it. The way you say things that are simply true. He looked at me then, That direct, unguarded look that was still new enough that it made me catch my breath slightly every time. "Thank you," he said. For staying. For all of it. Alexander. I need you to know I mean it. Not as your employer." He paused. I was not doing well. Before December. You knew that. I know you knew it. I was functioning, but not. He stopped. Tried again. She cracked something open. But it was you who kept. You who made it possible for me to be something other than what I've always been. A beat. I didn't know how to. I needed someone to show me what it looked like. To be okay. You were always going to be okay, I said gently. You were just waiting. He looked at me for a long time. Then, with a sudden, decisive motion, he reached into his coat pocket and produced a small, dark box. He held it between both hands, looking at it for a moment. And when he looked back up, there was something on his face that I had not seen there before. Nervousness. Alexander Vance, who had faced down hostile takeovers and congressional inquiries and the fullest wrath of the financial press, was nervous. I had a speech, he said. I rehearsed it. I asked Lily for advice, and she told me to just tell the truth, which is advice that I found. He stopped. Characteristically efficient, he said, and the corner of his mouth moved, just briefly. Then tell the truth, I said. He looked at me. I have $17 billion, he said. And before 2 months ago, I didn't have a reason to be happy about any of it. And now I have two. He opened the box. The ring inside it was simple and very beautiful. A single diamond on a plain platinum band. I'm aware that I am not the easiest person in the world to, Alexander, and that there are a significant number of documented complaints about my management style, and that I am aware I sometimes, Alexander. Yes, I said. A pause. He looked at the ring. He looked at me. That was, you said yes. I said yes. He put the ring on my finger with hands that were not quite steady, and I thought, here is the most powerful man I have ever known, shaking over a ring, and there is something more beautiful about that than anything he has ever built. The family court hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning in March. Lily was wearing a blue dress I had taken her to buy. A real dress, chosen by her, from a real store, after 45 minutes of the most methodical dress shopping I had ever witnessed, in which she examined each option with the gravity of a diplomat signing a treaty. She had chosen blue because it was Alexander's favorite color, a fact she had established by direct inquiry. What is your favorite color? Blue. Why? I don't know, it just is. Okay, then blue. And she wore it with white tights and small black shoes, and her hair done in 2 neat braids that I had learned to do over the past several weeks, and was now, I privately felt, reasonably good at. In the car on the way to the courthouse, she was very quiet. She was holding Alexander's hand and looking out the window. Will they let me stay? She asked. Yes, Alexander said. He had not hesitated. How do you know? Because the paperwork is complete, the home study was excellent, my lawyers are better than everyone else's, and I have not lost a legal proceeding in 11 years. A pause. And because you belong with us. She considered this. Okay, she said. She leaned her head against his arm in the car, in the way she had adopted. The hearing was 52 minutes long. Judge Patricia Reeves, whom I had assessed from the documentation as direct and thorough and not impressed by wealth, was exactly that. She asked Lily one question directly, looking at her over her glasses with the kind of attention that respects a child's intelligence. Is this where you want to be, Lily? Lily sat up very straight. Yes, she said. These are my people. The judge's expression, just briefly, softened. She looked back at her papers. She wrote something. She looked up. Petition for adoption is granted, she said. Lily Reyes is henceforth legally the daughter of Alexander Vance and Evelyn Hayes. Congratulations to all parties. I did not cry in the courtroom. I had made a specific decision about this, which I then comprehensively failed to keep. Whitmore produced, with the calm efficiency of a man who had done this many times before, a handkerchief, which he handed to me with a slight bow. Alexander did not cry in the courtroom. He sat very still with Lily on his lap. She had climbed up the moment the judge said granted, with the decisive efficiency of a child who had identified the correct place to be and gone directly there. And he held her with his face pressed against the top of her head, and he was, for approximately 90 seconds, a person with no armor at all. Outside on the courthouse steps, the same February becoming March air, but entirely different. Lily stood between us and held both of our hands and looked at the city with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was, I realized after a moment, uncomplicated happiness. Just that. Not the careful, provisional, waiting for the catch happiness of a child who has learned that good things are always followed by bad ones. Just happiness, plain and full and completely present. Lily, I said, what are you thinking? She turned her face up to me, squinting slightly against the pale March sun. I'm thinking, she said, that I'm hungry, and also that I live here now, and also. She looked at Alexander, who was looking at her with that expression that still took my breath away. Also, I think we should get a dog. Alexander looked at me. Absolutely not, I said. A small dog, Lily said. She makes a compelling case, Alexander said, very seriously. You are both, I started. A very small dog, Lily said. It could sleep at the foot of the bed. I would take care of it. I would never forget to feed it. She looked at me with those dark, earnest eyes. I know how it feels to be hungry. The March air moved around us, carrying the faint smell of something that might, in a few weeks, be spring. Fine, I said. A small dog. Lily's smile was the whole world. The tree in the penthouse living room was 7 feet tall. Lily had supervised its selection with an attention to detail that Alexander had observed, with visible admiration, as my kind of focus. They had gone together to the tree lot on the Upper West Side on a Saturday afternoon, the two of them, him in his coat, her in the red parka we had bought, her choice. She had stood in the store and held it against herself for a long time, as though not entirely believing she was allowed to have something so bright. And the small, white dog named Biscuit, who had arrived 3 weeks after the courthouse steps and was now firmly convinced that the purpose of the Vance penthouse was to provide him, personally, with heated floors and unlimited affection. The tree had been chosen, transported, and placed by the window with the Manhattan skyline behind it, and Lily had decorated it over the course of 2 evenings with the seriousness of someone performing a sacred rite. She had opinions about where each ornament should go. She documented these opinions at length. Alexander had agreed with all of them. On Christmas Eve, we were all 3 on the living room floor in front of the fireplace, Lily between us, leaning back against my knees, with Biscuit asleep across her feet and a book open in her lap that she had long since stopped reading. The fire was lit, and the tree was lit, and beyond the windows the city was 1,000 lights going on forever, indifferent and beautiful. Lily had eaten 3 of Pierre's cinnamon rolls and had not put a single crumb in her pocket. Tell me about when you were little, she said. She was speaking to Alexander, who was sitting beside me with his arm around my shoulders. I've told you, he said. Tell me again. He looked at the fire for a moment. I was small, he said. Smaller than you. Actually, when I was your age. And I didn't have what you have. A dog. No dog, he confirmed. Or a tree. No tree. She thought about this. Were you scared? Sometimes, he said. Yes. Me too, she said. Before. She paused. I'm not scared now. Good, he said. Is that because of the money? She asked, with the directness that had never stopped charming me. Because you have a lot of it. He was quiet for a moment. It helps, he said honestly. Money helps. It means you always have food and a warm place. That matters. He paused. But no, not mostly. Then what? He looked at me, and then down at her, and his face was open in the firelight in a way I don't think it had been open in a very long time. Because you're not alone, he said. That's the part that matters. The rest of it, the money, the building, all of it, it's just things. The part that matters is this. He gestured, a small, uncharacteristic gesture, encompassing the 3 of us, the fire, the dog at her feet. This, right here. Lily looked at the fire. She nodded slowly, as though filing this under something important. Okay, she said. She closed her book. She leaned her head back against my knees. I agree. Biscuit stirred in his sleep and made a small sound. Lily put her hand on his back without looking down. Outside, somewhere below us, the city was doing what it always did, running, spending, arguing, aching, dreaming. 47 floors below, in the December cold, there were alleys, and there were people in those alleys who were alone and cold and afraid. And I knew that. Knew it the way you know things that have been made real to you. And I also knew that there was a foundation with $50 million and investigative capacity and a director who had something to prove, and that we would do what we could. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. But it was something. It was also Christmas Eve, and there was a fire, and there was a dog named Biscuit who weighed 8 pounds and believed himself to be magnificent, and there was a small girl in a red parka who had once offered to sleep in a trash can and who was now, with the uncomplicated confidence of a child who knows she is exactly where she belongs, falling asleep against my knees. Alexander looked at her, and then at me. "Thank you," he said, very quietly. "For what, specifically?" "For staying," he said. "For all of it. For seeing me." He paused. "I was not easy to see." "You were," I said. "You just needed someone to look." He was quiet for a moment. The fire moved. The city glittered. "Are you happy?" he asked. The question surprised me, not because it was unexpected from him, but because of how simply he asked it, with none of the guardedness that had armored every other personal question he had ever asked me. I looked at Lily, asleep, at Biscuit, warm and absurd at her feet, at the tree in the window and the city beyond it, and the man beside me who had ruined a $10,000 suit in a filthy alley to wrap his coat around a shivering child and had not once, since that moment, looked back. "Yes," I said. He nodded. He leaned back. He looked at the fire. "Good," he said. Outside, it began to snow. Gently, the first real snow of winter, drifting past the 47th floor in slow, soft curtains. Lily slept through it. Biscuit slept through it. The city gathered it and held it for a little while before it melted away. We stayed like that for a long time, the three of us, in the warmth of the fire and the light of the tree and the snow falling soft and quiet against all the glass. Some families are built slowly, carefully, from the wreckage of what came before. Some families are built in an alley in winter, in the dark, with 2 trembling hands and a cashmere coat and a promise. "You will never sleep in a trash can again." She never did.